Did you learn anything useful during that weird disappearing act of yours? My cousin asked, making sure her wealthy friends were watching. Can you fight? I smiled and told her I only do hand-to-hand and knives are strictly optional. She laughed and asked if they called me princess. I looked her dead in the eye and said they called me Hades. A retired Navy SEAL standing nearby dropped his drink, shattering the glass, because he knew exactly who I was. My name is Riley. I am 33 years old and my family considers me an utter embarrassment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and tried to steal what rightfully belonged to you. The afternoon sun was beating down on the pristine patio of my cousin Courtney and her husband Jamal. The air smelled of expensive barbecue smoke, chlorine from the infinity pool, and the imported cigars being passed around by their wealthy guests. I stood near the edge of the patio, wearing my worn leather jacket proudly. I stuck out like a sore thumb among the sea of designer sundresses and tailored linen suits. I had not come here for a happy family reunion. I was summoned. Courtney, who is 34 and has spent her entire life treating me like a charity case, marched straight toward me. Her heels clicked sharply against the wet stone. Without a single word of greeting, she threw a thick, soaking wet stack of legal documents onto the glass patio table right in front of me. The water from the pool dripped onto the pages, blurring the dark ink completely away. "Sign it," Courtney demanded, her voice loud enough to make several nearby guests turn and stare. "Consider it back rent for carrying your dead weight all these years. You need to hand over grandfather's woodland cabin today. You are just a college dropout working a basic computer help desk job. You cannot even afford the property taxes on that land, let alone maintain it." I did not flinch. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out a tissue and calmly wiped the pool water off my leather jacket. I looked at the soggy paper. It was a deed transfer document. My grandfather had left me that modest cabin deep in the woods because he was the only person in this family who actually understood me. He knew I needed a quiet place to retreat. Courtney wanted it just so she could tear it down and build a commercial spa to impress her country club friends. My silence seemed to infuriate her. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking together loudly. "You have been a massive burden since the day you quit college," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard had to lie to everyone. They spent years pretending you were finding yourself instead of admitting you were just a huge failure." Before I could respond to her, a large shadow fell over the table. Jamal, Courtney's husband, stepped up beside her. Jamal is a brilliant, ruthlessly arrogant black African-American hedge fund manager on Wall Street. He carries himself like he owns the world, and today he was wearing a smug expression that perfectly matched his designer watch. He swirled the expensive scotch in his glass, looking down his nose at me. "Do not make this difficult," Riley Jamal warned, his tone dangerously smooth. "I have already drawn up the necessary paperwork. If you refuse to sign, my lawyers will drag you through civil court. We will bleed your little minimum wage paycheck dry until you are begging us to take that worthless property off your hands. You cannot afford to fight me. I manage billions for a living. You reset passwords for middle management. Know your place." He took a sip of his scotch, thoroughly enjoying the power trip. My Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard were standing just a few feet away, happily chatting with other guests. They heard absolutely everything Jamal said. They saw Courtney throw the wet documents at me. Neither of them stepped forward to intervene. My aunt simply adjusted her pearl necklace and looked away, pretending she did not see her own niece getting publicly humiliated. That was the exact family dynamic I had grown up with. My parents always worshipped Courtney and Jamal for their wealth, while treating my existence as a stain on their perfect social record. I looked at Jamal and then at Courtney. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of the anger rapidly boiling deep inside my chest. Instead, I leaned against the table, completely relaxed. "Is that really your best threat, Jamal?" I asked quietly. "Because I have heard much better threats from people who actually had the spine to back them up." Jamal saw his smug smile vanish completely. His jaw tightened. He took a step closer, towering over me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You have a lot of nerve for someone who lives paycheck to paycheck," he sneered. "You should be thanking us for taking this financial burden away from you. We are doing you a huge favor right now." The loud crash of shattering glass from the bar suddenly interrupted Jamal. Commander Briggs, the retired Navy SEAL I mentioned earlier, was staring at me in absolute terror. He was supposed to be the most important investor at this barbecue, but right now, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Aunt Patricia quickly rushed over to him, nervously laughing as she ordered a waiter to clean up the mess. She told the commander to ignore me, claiming I was just a delusional IT worker who had vanished for years. But Briggs knew the truth about my classified military past. Jamal watched the terrified color drain from the commander's face. He hated when anyone else commanded attention, especially at his own lavish event. His fragile ego bruised, Jamal stepped directly into my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp odor of his arrogance. "I do not know what cheap parlor trick you just pulled on my most important investor." Jamal growled, his voice low and menacing. "But you are going to pay for disrupting my barbecue. You think you can waltz in here wearing cheap leather and disrespect my guests? You are nothing." He turned away from me and sharply snapped his fingers high in the air. The luxury catering manager, a nervous man in a crisp white shirt, immediately rushed over. Jamal snatched the leather bill folder from the manager's tray and threw it onto the table right next to the soggy property deed. "Since you are acting so incredibly full of yourself today, Riley, you can cover the catering expenses for this afternoon," Jamal announced. His voice was completely devoid of volume control, ensuring that every wealthy guest lounging by the pool could hear him perfectly. "The total is $12,000. Consider it an entrance fee for breathing the same air as successful people." Aunt Patricia crossed her arms, her diamond rings catching the bright afternoon sun. "It is the absolute least you can do, Riley," she chimed in, her tone dripping with intense judgment. "We tolerated your embarrassing lifestyle choices for a solid decade. We paid for your braces, we bought your first car, and we smiled politely when you brought shame to our family name. Pay the bill right now, or your Uncle Richard will call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." Uncle Richard nodded in stern agreement, pulling his phone from his tailored slacks. He looked at me with the exact same disgust he used when I packed my bags at 19. "You always liked taking handouts, Riley," he sneered. "You took our generosity and threw it right back in our faces when you ran off to play soldier or whatever reckless fantasy you pursued. Now it is time to settle your debts. You owe this family. Pay the caterer, sign the cabin over to Courtney, and maybe we will let you walk out of here without handcuffs on your wrists." The catering manager stood awkwardly between us, holding out his silver tray. He looked genuinely apologetic, clearly uncomfortable being used as a weapon in our toxic family warfare. He whispered the total amount again, almost too afraid to make eye contact. $12,000, miss." Courtney smirked, picking up her crystal champagne flute. She took a slow, dramatic sip. "What is the matter, Riley?" she taunted. "Did you leave your piggy bank at your little studio apartment? Maybe you can offer to wash their dishes for the next 5 years to work off the debt." The crowd of elites around us chuckled softly, a cruel chorus of upper-class amusement. They were thoroughly enjoying the public execution of the family scapegoat. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend my financial status. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my worn leather jacket and pulled out a solid titanium Centurion black card. The heavy metal caught the sunlight as I casually tossed it onto the catering manager's silver tray. The heavy clink of the titanium hitting the metal tray echoed sharply over the gentle hum of the pool filters. "Run it," I told the manager, keeping my voice completely steady. The manager blinked in surprise, staring at the legendary black card. He quickly pulled a mobile point of sale terminal from his apron, inserted the heavy metal card, and typed in the massive $12,000 charge. The machine beeped enthusiastically. A bright green checkmark illuminated the digital screen. The transaction was approved instantly without a single hesitation from the banking network. Courtney dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the stone patio, splashing expensive sparkling wine all over her designer sandals. Her jaw hung open, her eyes locked on the tiny green light of the payment terminal. Aunt Patricia gasped, taking a sudden step backward, as if the credit card had physically struck her. Uncle Richard froze his phone, slipping slightly in his sweaty palm. Jamal stared at the receipt printing from the machine, his confident smirk cracking into a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He snatched the receipt from the manager and scrutinized the printed numbers, desperately looking for an error or a declined status. When he found none, his shock rapidly mutated into furious defensive rage. "You absolutely stole that!" Jamal scoffed, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. "There is no physical way a basic IT help desk worker qualifies for an invite-only titanium credit card. You probably stole your boss's corporate card from his desk. You are committing massive financial fraud right in front of us. Enjoy federal prison by Monday morning, you pathetic thief." He pulled his own phone from his pocket, his face twisting into a malicious, triumphant grin. "You made a huge mistake coming here today, Riley," he threatened. "I know the regional vice president at Sentinel IT. That is the pathetic little firm you work for, right? I play golf with him every single weekend at the country club. We just closed a massive tech infrastructure deal together. I am going to call him right now and tell him exactly what his minimum wage employee is doing with stolen company property. Let us just see if you even have a job tomorrow morning when he presses felony theft charges against you." Jamal aggressively dialed a 10-digit number on his phone, holding it up for the entire crowd to see his dominance. He pressed the sleek phone to his ear, staring me down with absolute venomous hatred, fully believing that he was about to end my entire miserable existence. He pressed the sleek phone to his ear, staring me down with absolute venomous hatred, fully believing that he was about to end my entire miserable existence. I did not wait around to hear his pathetic conversation with the regional vice president. I simply turned on my heel, leaving the dripping deed on the glass table, and walked out of the Hamptons estate. I left them all standing in the aftermath of my titanium card, surrounded by shattered glass and bruised egos. They thought they had won the war simply because I refused to engage in their petty, ridiculous battles. By Monday morning, my personal phone was vibrating relentlessly on my mahogany desk. The family group chat was completely blowing up with messages. I picked up the device and scrolled through the barrage of notifications. Vanessa had tagged me in a long, gleeful message. "I heard you got fired today," her text read. "Jamal made one phone call to his golf buddy, and your little help desk career is officially over. Bring the cabin deed to the city today, and I will gladly buy you a sandwich since you are unemployed and probably starving." Right beneath her message, Uncle Thomas chimed in with his usual brand of toxic wisdom. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Riley. You should have married that plumber I set you up with at 22 instead of rebelling and dropping out. At least then, you would have a man to pay your bills and protect you from the real world. Now look at your situation. You are 33, entirely jobless, and about to lose your grandfather's property because of your stubborn pride." The messages kept rolling, and each one crueler than the last. Aunt Patricia sent a message saying she hoped this harsh reality check would finally force me to grow up and respect my betters. They were all reveling in my perceived destruction. They pictured me sitting in a cramped, miserable studio apartment, crying over my negative bank balance, desperately wondering how I would survive the week. The harsh reality of my actual life would have given them a collective heart attack. I was not crying in a tiny, rundown apartment. I was sitting at the head of a massive, polished obsidian conference table inside the heavily fortified, bulletproof command center of Aegis Global. My company, the multi-billion-dollar private intelligence and cybersecurity firm I had built from absolutely nothing over the last decade. The command center hummed with quiet, focused energy. Floor-to-ceiling digital screens wrapped around the entire room, displaying real-time global threat assessments, encrypted financial flows, and satellite surveillance feeds. Dozens of elite analysts, former intelligence officers, and top-tier cybersecurity experts moved purposefully between server banks and tactical workstations. The air conditioning kept the room at a crisp, precise temperature, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of Jamal's backyard barbecue. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, sipping a perfectly brewed espresso. I wore a tailored midnight blue suit that cost more than Jamal's entire outdoor kitchen setup. The titanium Centurion card rested casually on the table next to my keyboard. I looked down at the family group chat again. Jamal really did use his Wall Street leverage to get my Sentinel IT contract terminated. He was incredibly predictable. The heavy reinforced glass doors of the command center slid open with a soft hiss. Marcus, my chief of operations, and a former senior CIA operative walked briskly toward my desk. He wore a sharp gray suit, his eyes scanning the digital readouts before locking onto me. He carried a secure encrypted tablet in his right hand. Marcus stopped at the edge of the obsidian table and slid the tablet across the smooth surface toward me. Sentinel IT just officially terminated your cover identity, boss. He reported, his voice crisp and completely devoid of panic. The termination notice cites budget cuts and restructuring, but our internal intercepts confirm it was a direct mandate from their regional vice president, following a personal phone call from Jamal yesterday afternoon. I picked up the tablet and briefly reviewed the termination paperwork. My low-level IT help desk cover had served its purpose for the past 2 years, allowing me to monitor corporate vulnerabilities from the bottom up without drawing unwanted attention. Now Jamal had inadvertently severed my last tie to the civilian workforce. He really thinks he just destroyed my livelihood, I said, a genuine smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. He thinks I am entirely dependent on that paycheck to keep my grandfather's cabin safe. Marcus crossed his arms, raising a questioning eyebrow. He is a hedge fund manager who thinks his wealth makes him untouchable. People like him always underestimate quiet adversaries. What are your orders, Commander? Should we initiate a standard retaliation protocol against his firm? I set the tablet down and looked up at the massive global financial tracker displayed on the primary wall screen. Jamal had spent years looking down on me, insulting my intelligence, and using his financial power to bully anyone who stood in his way. He wanted to play a game of financial ruin. He wanted to weaponize money to steal the only piece of property my grandfather had ever loved. Cancel the standard protocol, I instructed, softly leaning forward and steepling my fingers together. Jamal wants to show off his Wall Street leverage. Let us see how much leverage he actually holds when the lights go out. I want full access to his digital footprint. I want his public filings, his shadow accounts, and his offshore holdings. Marcus nodded, a dangerous glint appearing in his eyes. He tapped his earpiece, already opening a secure channel to our elite white hat hacker division. Understood. Where do you want us to start? I smiled, the cool air of the command center matching the cold ice in my veins. Let us take a good long look at Jamal's hedge fund. Marcus did not hesitate. He tapped commands into his tablet, and the digital displays covering the front wall shifted. The global threat maps vanished, replaced by cascading lines of financial code and corporate registry data. My elite hackers went to work. Jamal thought his little Wall Street firewall was impenetrable because he paid a boutique security firm top dollar. My team sliced through his perimeter defenses in exactly 47 seconds. I walked up to the main display, my eyes tracking the rapid flow of information. Pull up the public ledgers first, I ordered. Let us see what he wants the Securities and Exchange Commission to see. The screens populated with beautifully manicured financial reports. Consistent quarterly growth, aggressive tech investments, and a healthy reserve of liquid capital. It was a masterpiece of creative accounting. Jamal was painting a picture of absolute financial dominance. But arrogance always leaves a messy digital trail. Run a deep sweep for shadow ledgers, I told Marcus. Cross-reference his personal offshore accounts with the corporate holdings. Follow the IP addresses logging into the system outside of standard trading hours. Less than 2 minutes later, a secondary set of spreadsheets bled onto the right side of the main screen. The real numbers. What I saw made my blood run ice cold. Jamal was not a financial genius. He was running a sinking ship. The shadow ledgers revealed massive systemic money laundering. He had been taking high-risk capital from dangerous international players and funneling it through a complex web of shell corporations based in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. He was washing the money clean, taking a cut and faking his returns to keep his legitimate investors happy. But his high-risk trades had tanked completely over the last 3 quarters. He was hemorrhaging cash. Jamal was dangerously close to total insolvency. If his illegal clients found out he had lost their money, they would not just sue him, they would end him. "Boss, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice dropping. He projected a specific collateral agreement onto the center screen. I stared at the digital document, my stomach twisting in pure disgust. Jamal had not just risked his own money. He had quietly leveraged the family assets to secure an emergency bridge loan to cover his immediate shortfall. He had forged documents and used Aunt Diane and Uncle Thomas's retirement portfolios, their primary residence, and Courtney's trust fund as collateral. They had no idea. In reality, he mortgaged their existence to buy a few months of survival. If this loan defaulted, my aunt and uncle would be completely destitute. My secure mobile device vibrated loudly against the obsidian table, shattering the tense silence in the room. It was a voicemail notification from an unlisted number. I routed the audio directly through the command center speakers so Marcus and the senior analysts could hear. Jamal's voice echoed through the room, dripping with artificial superiority and barely contained panic. "Hello, Riley," Jamal sneered. "I heard the tragic news about your little employment situation at Sentinel IT today. Such a shame. It is almost like actions have direct consequences in the real world. But I am not done teaching you a lesson. Since you want to play games with that fake black card and embarrass my wife, I am going to show you what real power looks like. I am having your personal bank accounts frozen pending a fraud investigation." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You are completely cut off. You have zero income, zero access to credit, and by tomorrow morning, you will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee. Bring the deed to the cabin to my city office by noon on Friday and sign it over to Courtney. Do it quietly, and I might call off the dogs. If you refuse, I will make sure you cannot even rent a basic apartment in this country. You will be sleeping on the streets. Think carefully, Riley. You are completely outmatched." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. Marcus looked at me, waiting for my reaction. Jamal genuinely believed he had me backed into a corner. He thought freezing the meager civilian bank account attached to my cover identity would break my spirit. He had no idea he was threatening a woman who controlled a multi-billion-dollar private intelligence network. "Do not touch his bank accounts yet," I ordered, my voice dangerously calm. "Let him think he is winning. Dig deeper into his private communications. Find out exactly why he is so desperate for my grandfather's specific piece of land." The lead audio analyst quickly isolated a heavily encrypted voice over Internet Protocol call from Jamal's private server. It was recorded late last night. I signaled the analyst to play the audio. Jamal was speaking to a prominent commercial real estate developer. "Do not worry about the environmental zoning," Jamal said on the recording, his voice thick with desperation. "I am acquiring the woodland property by Friday. My wife's loser cousin is broke and desperate. She will sign the deed over. The second the ink is dry, I want you to bulldoze the entire property. Level the cabin to the dirt. We are going to build the commercial retreat exactly as planned. The valuation alone will satisfy my investors and cover the losses." The developer hesitated on the recording. "What about your wife's family? Will they contest the demolition of their father's cabin?" Jamal scoffed loudly. "They do not care about some rotting wood. They only care about money. And once I build this retreat, they will be too busy spending the profits to ask any questions. Just have the bulldozers ready to roll by Friday morning." The audio file ended. The truth hung in the crisp air of the command center. He was not just stealing my grandfather's legacy, he was going to erase it from the face of the earth to save his own miserable life. I stared at the audio waveform slowly fading from the massive digital display. Jamal was not merely a greedy relative looking to upgrade his country club status. He was a desperate, cornered animal willing to obliterate my family history to cover his own federal crimes. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. I could easily wipe out his digital servers and crash his hedge fund using brute force, but that would allow him to play the victim of a cyber attack. I wanted him to face the very real, very legal consequences of his own arrogance. "Package the data drop," I ordered Marcus. my voice echoing off the obsidian walls. Every shadow ledger, the Cayman shell routes the forged documents he used to collateralize my aunt and uncle's funds, and the audio file detailing his plan to bulldoze the property. Everything. Marcus's fingers flew across his tablet compiling the explosive dossier. Ready, boss. Where are we sending it? Where are we? I pulled up an encrypted untraceable terminal on my workstation. I logged into a ghost alias I had cultivated for years specifically for high-level federal whistleblowing. We are sending it directly to the Director of Enforcement at the Securities and Exchange Commission, I said, hitting the execute key. Let Wall Street's finest deal with the federal government. Miles away, high above the bustling streets of Manhattan, Jamal sat in his sprawling glass-walled corner office. The room reeked of unearned power. Custom Italian leather furniture, imported marble floors, and panoramic views of the city skyline served as a monument to his massive ego. He was leaning back in his executive chair, a smug smile plastered across his face as he stared at a digital rendering of the luxury commercial retreat he planned to build over my grandfather's beloved cabin. He firmly believed he had completely outsmarted everyone. His private desk phone, a secure line reserved exclusively for his highest-tier international investors, suddenly rang. Jamal straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and picked up the receiver with practiced arrogance. Jamal speaking, he answered smoothly. "Mr. Jamal Blackwood," a stern, unapologetic voice echoed through the earpiece. "This is Special Agent Harris with the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. We are calling to formally notify you that all assets, trading accounts, and operational ledgers associated with your hedge fund have been temporarily frozen by federal mandate effective immediately." Jamal felt the blood instantly drain from his face. His smug smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The glass of sparkling water on his desk suddenly looked miles away. Frozen. Jamal choked out, his voice cracking as his carefully constructed world began to violently implode. "On what grounds? You have absolutely no legal right to freeze my operational capital. We have received a highly credible, heavily documented intelligence dossier detailing massive systemic money laundering, illicit offshore shell routing, and fraudulent collateralization of familial assets," Agent Harris stated coldly. "You are now the subject of an active top-tier federal investigation. Your fund is mandated to undergo an immediate comprehensive cybersecurity and financial audit. If this audit confirms the discrepancies in our dossier, you will be facing a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Jamal gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles turning completely white. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his expensive silk collar. He desperately tried to activate his usual charm. "Listen, Agent Harris. This is clearly a massive misunderstanding. I have my own internal security team. I will have them compile a full financial report and clear this up by Monday morning." "You do not seem to understand your current position." "Mr. Blackwood," the federal agent interrupted sharply. "You do not get to choose your auditor. Because your illicit financial pipelines involve high-risk international players, the federal government is invoking a national security protocol. You are strictly mandated to use an external government-approved contractor to perform the audit by this Friday." Jamal frantically wiped the sweat from his brow. "Fine, name the firm. I will cut them a check right now." "Who are they?" "There is only one private intelligence firm in the country with the necessary security clearance and technical capability to handle an audit of this specific magnitude," Agent Harris replied. "The firm is Aegis Global. Their representatives will contact you. Do not attempt to move any assets." The line went dead. Jamal dropped the receiver, his hands shaking violently. He knew the name Aegis Global. Everyone on Wall Street knew the name Aegis Global. They were a ruthless ghost-like intelligence firm that destroyed corrupt corporations for sport. Nobody knew who their CEO was, but their reputation for absolute, unapologetic destruction was legendary. Jamal was staring directly down the barrel of a federal prison sentence, and his only lifeline was a faceless corporate entity that could not be bribed or intimidated. He grabbed his personal cell phone and frantically dialed his wife. Vanessa answered on the second ring, the loud sounds of an upscale boutique echoing in the background. "Vanessa." Listen to me right now. Jamal gasped, his voice tight with absolute panic. Drop whatever you are buying and get back to the penthouse immediately. We have a massive crisis. The feds just froze my entire fund. What are you talking about? Vanessa shrieked, the casual arrogance completely dropping from her voice. How is that even possible? What about the cabin property? What about my new car? Forget the car! Jamal yelled, pacing across his marble floor. I am facing federal prison by Friday if I do not fix this. The SEC is forcing me to undergo a mandatory audit by Aegis Global. They are the most dangerous firm on the planet. Call the Waldorf Astoria right now and book their biggest ballroom for Thursday night. We have to host an emergency ultra-exclusive gala. We have to court the anonymous CEO of Aegis Global and convince them to look the other way, or we are going to lose everything. Jamal had no idea that the anonymous CEO he was desperately scrambling to impress was the very same woman he had just publicly humiliated. I monitored his frantic communications from the quiet sanctuary of the Aegis Global Command Center for a few more hours, watching the digital web tighten around his fraudulent empire. Satisfied that the trap was securely set, I decided to step out of the secure facility for a brief moment of normalcy. I walked down the street to an upscale artisanal coffee shop I frequented when I needed to clear my head. The rich aroma of freshly roasted beans and the gentle hum of civilian conversation offered a stark contrast to the high-stakes cyber warfare I orchestrated daily. I ordered a double espresso, took a seat in a quiet leather booth near the back, and opened a physical book, enjoying the rare luxury of printed pages. My piece lasted exactly 14 minutes. The heavy wooden door of the cafe swung open with an aggressive force that made several patrons look up from their laptops. Aunt Diane and Uncle Thomas marched inside, their eyes scanning the room like predators hunting a wounded animal. They spotted me instantly. They moved with a synchronized, entitled urgency, their expensive cashmere coats brushing past tables without a single apology to the people they bumped into. They did not happen to be in the neighborhood. They had tracked me. Uncle Thomas reached my booth first, his face flushed with an angry red hue that clashed terribly with his pastel blue sweater. He slammed a thick manila folder onto the small wooden table, knocking my book aside. The sudden noise echoed sharply in the quiet cafe. He leaned over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, breathing heavily through his nose. Aunt Diane slid into the booth directly across from me, trapping me against the wall. Her face was set in a tight, furious mask, her lips pressed into a thin line of absolute disapproval. She did not bother with pleasantries or basic human decency. She unclasped the folder and aggressively pushed a stack of legal documents across the table. It was the property deed transfer for my grandfather's cabin, freshly reprinted and covered in sticky notes indicating exactly where I needed to sign. I looked at the papers, then slowly raised my eyes to meet hers. I did not flinch. I did not shrink away. I simply picked up my porcelain cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The dark, bitter liquid grounded me, keeping my focus razor sharp. You are going to sign these papers right now, Riley. Aunt Diane demanded, her voice a harsh, venomous hiss that she deliberately kept low to avoid alerting the barista. We are absolutely done playing these childish games with you. You owe us this, Diane hissed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping aggressively against the glossy paper. When you dropped out of college, we had to lie to our country club friends for years. We spent over a decade making up ridiculous excuses about your whereabouts because admitting you were a complete failure was too humiliating for our social standing. Give Jamal the cabin so he can secure his business. Stop being a selfish parasite and finally do something useful for the family that gave you everything. Uncle Thomas crossed his arms tightly across his chest, nodding in fierce agreement. Jamal is dealing with a minor cash flow issue, and your stubbornness is making it worse, he added, completely ignorant of the massive federal investigation currently crushing his son-in-law. He needs that land by Friday to finalize a massive commercial development deal. If you ruin this for him, you ruin Courtney's future, and I will personally make sure you never find employment in this city again. You are a disgrace to this family, Riley. Just sign the damn papers and disappear back into whatever miserable hole you crawled out of. I set my espresso cup back onto its matching saucer with a soft, precise clink. The sheer audacity of their demands was breathtaking, but I felt absolutely no anger. I felt nothing but cold, clinical detachment. They were fighting for a mirage, defending a man who had already stolen their financial security. I looked right through Aunt Diane's angry facade. You did not care when I was sleeping on a cot in a war zone. Diane, I stated calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. You did not care when I vanished, because you were too busy protecting your fragile social status at a golf course. You only care now because Jamal's house of cards is falling. I stood up smoothly, sliding out of the booth before Uncle Thomas could even attempt to block my path. I left the legal papers sitting on the table completely unsigned. Aunt Diane gasped, her face turning a deep, blotchy red. You are making a massive mistake, Riley, she yelled, finally losing her grip on her precious volume control. The entire coffee shop turned to stare at her. I ignored her entirely, walking out the door and into the crisp afternoon air. The cool wind brushed against my face, carrying the distant sound of city traffic. I took a deep breath, letting the tension of the brief, pathetic encounter leave my body. They were so predictable, so easily manipulated by their own blinding greed. As my boots hit the pavement, my secure phone vibrated heavily in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a direct text message from Vanessa. The message contained a high-resolution photograph. My stomach tightened as the image loaded. It was a massive, heavy-duty yellow bulldozer, its metal treads digging deep into the soil, parked directly on the dirt path, right outside my grandfather's beloved woodland cabin. Beneath the threatening picture, Vanessa had typed a single menacing sentence. Sign it by Friday or it is gone. I instructed Marcus to keep a relentless digital chokehold on every account Jamal possessed. The sterile, pressurized environment of the Aegis Global Command Center was suddenly stifling. I told my team to maintain surveillance protocols and stepped out of the fortified facility. I needed the grounding reality of the civilian world, if only for 20 minutes. I walked down the busy street to a quiet, upscale coffee shop I used when I needed to clear my mind. The rich aroma of roasted espresso beans and the gentle hum of conversation offered a stark contrast to the cyber warfare I orchestrated daily. I ordered a double espresso, took a seat in a secluded leather booth near the back wall, and opened a physical book. I wanted to enjoy the simple luxury of printed pages and absolute silence. My fleeting peace lasted exactly 14 minutes. The heavy wooden door of the cafe swung open with an aggressive force that made several patrons flinch and look up from their laptops. Aunt Diane and Uncle Thomas marched inside, their eyes scanning the room like desperate predators hunting a wounded animal. They spotted me instantly. They moved with a synchronized urgency, their expensive cashmere coats brushing past tables without a single apology to the people they bumped into. They did not happen to be in the neighborhood by pure coincidence. They had tracked my digital signature to ambush me. Uncle Thomas reached my booth first, his face flushed with an angry red hue that clashed terribly with his pastel blue sweater. He slammed a thick manila folder onto the small wooden table, forcefully knocking my book aside. The sudden noise echoed loudly in the quiet cafe. He leaned over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, breathing heavily like a cornered bull. Aunt Diane slid into the booth across from me, intentionally trapping me against the wall. Her face was set in a tight, furious mask, her lips pressed into a thin line of absolute disapproval. She did not bother with pleasantries or basic human decency. She unclasped the heavy folder and aggressively pushed a stack of legal documents across the table. It was the property deed transfer for my grandfather's cabin, freshly reprinted, and covered in bright yellow sticky notes indicating exactly where I needed to sign. I looked at the threatening papers, then slowly raised my eyes to meet hers. I did not flinch. I did not shrink away. I simply picked up my porcelain cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. You are going to sign these papers right now, Riley. Aunt Diane demanded, her voice a harsh, venomous hiss that she deliberately kept low. We are absolutely completely done playing these childish games with you. You owe us this. Diane hissed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping aggressively against the glossy paper. When you dropped out of college, we had to lie to our country club friends for years. We spent over a decade making up ridiculous, embarrassing excuses about your whereabouts because admitting you were a complete failure was too humiliating for our social standing. We protected you from public shame. Give Jamal the cabin so he can secure his business. Stop being a selfish parasite and finally do something useful for the family that gave you everything. Uncle Thomas crossed his arms tightly across his chest, nodding in fierce, desperate agreement. Jamal is dealing with a minor cash flow issue, and your stubbornness is making it worse, he added, completely ignorant of the massive federal investigation currently crushing his son-in-law. He needs that land by Friday to finalize a massive commercial development deal. If you ruin this for him, you ruin Courtney's future, and I will personally make sure you never find employment in this city again. You are a disgrace to this family, Riley. Just sign the damn papers and disappear back into whatever miserable hole you crawled out of. I set my espresso cup back onto its matching saucer with a soft, precise clink. The sheer audacity of their demands was breathtaking, but I felt absolutely no anger. I felt nothing but cold, clinical detachment. They were fighting for a mirage, defending a man who had already stolen their financial security. I looked right through Aunt Diane's angry facade. You did not care when I was sleeping on a cot in a war zone. Diane, I stated calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. You did not care when I vanished because you were too busy protecting your fragile social status at a golf course. You only care now because Jamal's house of cards is falling. I stood up smoothly, sliding out of the booth before Uncle Thomas could even attempt to block my path. I left the legal papers sitting on the table unsigned. Aunt Diane gasped, her face turning a blotchy red. You are making a massive mistake, Riley, she yelled, finally losing her grip on her precious volume control. The entire coffee shop turned to stare at her. I ignored her entirely, walking straight out the front door and into the crisp, cool afternoon air. The cool wind brushed against my face, carrying the distant sound of city traffic. I took a deep breath, letting the tension of the brief, pathetic encounter leave my body. They were so predictable, so easily manipulated by their own blinding greed. As my boots hit the pavement, my secure phone vibrated heavily in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a direct text message from Vanessa. The digital message contained a very high-resolution color photograph. My stomach tightened as the image loaded. It was a massive, heavy-duty yellow bulldozer, its metal treads digging deep into the soil, parked directly on the dirt path right outside my grandfather's beloved woodland cabin. Beneath the threatening picture, Vanessa had typed a single menacing sentence. Sign it by Friday or it is gone. Friday night arrived with the suffocating weight of an impending execution for Jamal. Marcus had intercepted the guest list earlier. I simply instructed him to add one name to the VIP registry. Hades. Now the Waldorf Astoria's ballroom dripped with frantic opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elite politicians, investors, and Wall Street titans Jamal had hastily assembled. Waiters glided across imported marble floors carrying trays of champagne. Every detail was meticulously designed to project an illusion of financial invincibility. It was a spectacular lie. Jamal paced near the grand entrance, hands sweating inside his custom tuxedo. He checked his Rolex for the fourth time. His eyes darted nervously between the gilded doors and his security detail. He desperately needed the anonymous CEO of Aegis Global to walk through those doors. His freedom depended entirely on charming this ghost into accepting a massive bribe to falsify the SEC audit. If the executive did not show up, federal agents would raid his offices by Monday morning. A few feet away, oblivious to her husband's impending federal indictment, Vanessa held court near the champagne fountain. She wore a $15,000 sequined gown, laughing loudly with wealthy socialites. Aunt Diane stood beside her, sipping her drink with a smug expression. Vanessa boasted about their upcoming real estate venture, ignoring the panic radiating from Jamal. "We are officially acquiring this woodland property by the weekend," Vanessa bragged loudly, gesturing with her flute. My pathetic cousin practically begged us to take the land off her hands. "We are going to bulldoze her moldy cabin on Monday and lay the foundation for a luxury commercial spa. It will double our portfolio value before the quarter ends." Her friends murmured their approval, unaware that the property deed remained unsigned on a coffee shop table. Jamal shot Vanessa a furious glare, silently pleading with her to lower her voice, but she deliberately looked away. He wiped sweat from his temple, turning his desperate gaze back to the red carpet. Outside, the Waldorf Astoria armored SUVs pulled smoothly up to the curb. The bulletproof doors of the lead vehicle swung open. I stepped out onto the plush red carpet. I was no longer the quiet family scapegoat hiding behind a worn leather jacket. Tonight, I was exactly who I had built myself to be. I wore a breathtaking emerald green evening gown that flowed like liquid glass. The fabric caught the flash of the streetlights, projecting absolute power. A diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, an undeniable declaration of wealth. Marcus and two Aegis operatives flanked me silently as I walked up the velvet steps. I moved with cold precision. The heavy glass doors parted for me. I stepped into the grand ballroom, letting my eyes sweep over the desperate display of wealth Jamal had orchestrated. I saw him immediately pacing near the entrance, looking like a cornered rat. Then I saw Vanessa and Aunt Diane. Vanessa turned toward the entrance as I crossed the threshold. The haughty laugh died in her throat. Her eyes widened in shock, scanning my emerald gown and the security detail flanking me. Her brain simply refused to process my presence. Then the shock morphed into vicious rage. She slammed her flute onto a waiter's tray and marched toward me, her heels striking the marble floor like weapons. Aunt Diane followed closely behind her face, twisting into a mask of indignation. Vanessa physically stepped right in front of me, throwing her arms out to block my path. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Vanessa hissed, her voice vibrating with venomous disbelief. "You actually stalked us here. You think you can rent a cheap dress, crash my husband's elite investor gala, and beg for money in front of our friends. You are completely psychotic." Aunt Diane stepped up next to her daughter, glaring at me with unbridled disgust. "This is a private high-security event," Riley Diane snapped, pointing a sharp finger at the exit. "You do not belong here. You have never belonged anywhere near our level of society. Turn around and walk out right now before we have you thrown into a police cruiser." I did not say a single word. I simply looked at them, my expression blank, offering no reaction to their pathetic insults. My silence only infuriated Vanessa further. She turned toward the main entrance and frantically waved her hand in the air. "Security," she shrieked, dropping all pretense of elegance. "Get over here right now. We have a hostile trespasser. Remove this woman immediately." Two hotel security guards broke away from their posts by the door. They moved toward us, hands reaching for the radios clipped to their belts. Jamal, hearing the commotion, finally turned around. His eyes locked onto me, his jaw dropping in horrified confusion. He took a hesitant step forward, unsure how to handle my impossible appearance at his survival gala. The guards closed the distance, reaching out to drag me out of the ballroom. Marcus shifted slightly, preparing to intercept, but I raised a single finger, silently ordering him to hold his position. I wanted the family to dig their own graves as deep as possible. Before the first guard could lay a finger on my emerald gown, a booming, authoritative voice echoed across the foyer. "Stand down immediately!" The guards froze in their tracks. Commander Briggs, the retired Navy SEAL and Jamal's most crucial financial investor, stepped swiftly out of the gathered crowd. He marched directly toward the confrontation. The room fell entirely silent. Jamal sighed, relieved, clearly believing his top investor was stepping in to handle the crazy relative and save the evening. But Commander Briggs ignored Vanessa and Aunt Diane. He walked past the confused security guards and stopped directly in front of me. The imposing veteran stood at rigid attention. His eyes were wide, filled with absolute awe and unmistakable terror. He recognized the emerald dress. He recognized the shadow detail. He recognized exactly who I was. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Commander Briggs swallowed hard, his posture perfectly straight, his hands resting rigidly at his sides. He opened his mouth to address me, his voice trembling with a respect born of pure, unadulterated fear, but he never got the chance to speak. Vanessa was entirely incapable of reading the room. She could not comprehend why a highly decorated military veteran and billionaire investor was standing at strict attention for her impoverished cousin. Blinded by her own raging narcissism and desperate to reclaim the spotlight, she shoved her way past the stunned commander. She held her crystal flute of vintage champagne, high her newly purchased $15,000 sequined dress, catching the brilliant chandelier light as she stomped aggressively toward me, eager to protect the fraudulent empire she believed was rightfully hers. Her face was twisted into a grotesque mask of petty jealousy. She could not stand that the entire room had stopped to stare at my arrival. She locked eyes with me, her lips curling into a wicked, calculating sneer. With a theatrical gasp, Vanessa threw her weight forward. She perfectly executed a fake stumble, tilting her crystal glass and sending a cascading wave of pale, bubbling liquid directly onto the hem of my custom emerald gown. The cold champagne soaked immediately into the delicate silk, leaving a dark, spreading stain across the flawless fabric. The sharp scent of alcohol filled the space between us. She straightened up instantly, smoothing her perfectly styled hair with a victorious, unapologetic smirk. "Oops," Vanessa mocked, her voice carrying loudly across the hushed marble floor. "Guess they do not teach grace at the IT help desk. Get out before Jamal has you arrested." Before the echoes of her pathetic insult could fade, Jamal marched over to join his wife. He was practically vibrating with a toxic combination of overwhelming stress and misplaced superiority. The prestigious gala was his final gambit to evade prison, and he was absolutely terrified of failure. He was now completely unraveled, his entire face slick with nervous sweat and flushed with misdirected rage. The pressure of the federal mandate was clearly breaking his mind. He pushed past Commander Briggs without a second glance, utterly oblivious to the veteran's rigid, terrified stance. Jamal pointed a trembling, aggressive finger directly at my face, stepping dangerously close into my personal space. "I told you I would ruin you," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with the intense strain of his impending federal doom. "You come to my event looking for a handout. You think parading around in a rented dress is going to save your pathetic little life. I am hosting the most exclusive gala in the city tonight. I am about to meet the most powerful contractor in the entire country, and I will not let a worthless parasite like you ruin my one absolute chance at salvation. Throw this trash out." The wealthy socialites and Wall Street elites surrounding us gasped in collective shock at his aggressive outburst. They whispered frantically behind their hands, fully expecting me to crumble into tears and run out the gilded doors in total humiliation. They waited for the poor defeated cousin to retreat into the shadows. Instead, I stood completely still. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer them the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I slowly looked down at the dark, dripping champagne stain ruining the bottom of my beautiful silk gown. I lifted my gaze back to Vanessa, my eyes locking onto hers with cold, lethal precision. "I have had insurgent blood washed out of worse fabrics, Vanessa," I stated, my voice cutting through the tense, stagnant air like a sharpened blade. "A little cheap wine will not melt me." Vanessa blinked rapidly, momentarily confused by the stark, violent reality of my words. She expected a crying victim, but she was staring directly at a hardened predator. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward, the crystal flute shaking slightly in her manicured hand. I shifted my gaze to Jamal. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as his hands balled into tight, furious fists at his sides. He was so completely consumed by his own arrogance and his desperate, frantic need to impress the mythical CEO of Aegis Global that he failed to notice the incredibly obvious signs surrounding him. He failed to question why I was flanked by elite, highly trained operatives who moved with deadly synchronization. He failed to see the secure communication earpiece resting discreetly in Marcus's right ear. He failed to ask why Commander Briggs, a man who commanded absolute authority and commanded immense respect on Wall Street, was still standing silently at strict attention, too terrified to intervene or offer Jamal any assistance. Jamal only saw the weak cousin he believed he could easily crush. He only saw a minor obstacle standing between him and his desperate bid for freedom. His massive ego blinded him to the undeniable reality that the very person he needed to save him from federal prison was standing right in front of him wearing a ruined emerald dress. "This is my event," Jamal roared, his face turning a dangerous volatile shade of purple as he completely lost control of his carefully crafted public persona. "You do not get to come in here and threaten my wife. You do not get to embarrass me in front of my elite investors." He turned sharply to his right, locking his furious eyes with his lead private security guard. The large man in the cheap suit hesitated, glancing nervously at Marcus, sensing the dangerous shift in the room's energy. But Jamal was far beyond reason. He snapped his fingers aggressively, pointing his arm directly at my chest. "Take her down!" Jamal ordered, angry spit flying from his lips as he delivered his final command. "I do not care how you do it. Grab her arms and drag her out into the alley right now." The two thick-necked security guards lunged forward to execute Jamal's furious order. They expected an easy physical removal of an unwanted guest. They never managed to close the final 3 feet between us. Commander Briggs moved with explosive violence that defied his age. He stepped directly into the path of the oncoming guards. He did not politely ask them to stop. He reached out with both hands and violently shoved the 2 massive men backward. The sheer kinetic force of the retired Navy SEAL sent the lead guard stumbling wildly until his boots caught an ornate rug. He crashed into a cocktail table, sending crystal glasses shattering across the polished marble floor. The second guard stumbled into the champagne fountain, causing expensive alcohol to rain down upon the horrified guests standing nearby. Jamal froze. His arm remained extended in a rigid pointing gesture, but the arrogant snarl completely melted from his face. He stared at his prestigious investor in bewilderment. "Briggs, what the hell are you doing?" Jamal stammered, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "That is my wife's deranged cousin. She is trespassing. I ordered my men to throw her out." Commander Briggs did not acknowledge Jamal's existence. He did not look at Vanessa, who was standing frozen with her empty champagne flute dangling from her fingers. Briggs kept his eyes locked straight ahead, staring into the middle distance just past my right shoulder. He squared his broad shoulders, snapped his heels together with a sharp resonant click, and maintained a posture of flawless, unyielding military respect. Before Jamal could demand an explanation, the heavy gilded doors at the rear of the grand ballroom flew open. They did not open for a waiter or a late-arriving socialite. 6 elite Aegis security contractors flooded into the opulent room. They did not wear tuxedos. They wore tailored midnight black tactical suits, moving with a terrifying predatory grace that instantly commanded the entire room's attention. They fanned out, executing a flawless tactical maneuver. In seconds, they completely bypassed the bewildered hotel security and formed a tight, impenetrable protective perimeter directly around me. The high society crowd shrank back, pressing themselves against the silk-lined walls. The ambient chatter died instantly. The string quartet playing softly in the corner abruptly stopped, their bows hovering over their violins. The silence in the ballroom became heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Commander Briggs took one sharp, deliberate step forward. He inhaled deeply, filling his chest, and his voice boomed across the cavernous room with the raw, indisputable authority of a seasoned combat veteran. "Detail attention." Briggs barked out the command, echoing violently off the high-painted ceilings. "Commander Hades is on site." In perfect unison, the 6 heavily armed Aegis contractors snapped their boots together. They bowed their heads respectfully toward me, a silent, lethal acknowledgement of their absolute loyalty and my absolute command. Marcus, standing firmly at my right flank, adjusted his cuff and offered a slight respectful nod. The silence that followed was unlike anything the Waldorf Astoria had ever witnessed. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality imploding. Jamal's jaw physically dropped, hitting the floor as the blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of gray. His eyes darted frantically between the elite tactical operatives, the rigid Commander Briggs, and finally resting on me. His brain visually struggled to process the devastating catastrophic truth. The woman he had relentlessly mocked, the cousin he threatened to leave homeless, the supposed financial failure he thought he could easily crush under his expensive Italian shoes, was the apex predator he had spent the last 48 hours desperately scrambling to appease. He had invited the Wall Street elite to witness his ultimate salvation, but he had actually orchestrated his own public execution. Vanessa looked like she had just seen a violent, terrifying ghost. The smug, malicious satisfaction she wore mere seconds ago vanished, completely erased by a creeping, paralyzing dread. Her mouth opened and closed silently, unable to form a single coherent word as she stared at the terrifying security perimeter separating her from me. She looked down at the empty glass in her shaking hand, then down at the spreading stain on my emerald dress. The realization of what she had just done, the monumental, catastrophic mistake she made, hit her with the physical force of a freight train. Aunt Diane stood paralyzed behind her daughter, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Her hands trembled so violently, she dropped her designer clutch, spilling lipstick and credit cards across the expensive marble tiles. She did not bend down to retrieve them. She could only stare in horror at the woman she had viciously insulted in the coffee shop just a few hours prior. The elite politicians, the wealthy investors, and the arrogant hedge fund managers all stood frozen in place, holding their breath. They were witnessing a spectacular shift in power, an absolute dismantling of Jamal's fraudulent empire playing out live in stunning high definition. They suddenly realized they were not attending a celebration of financial success. They were standing inside a carefully constructed trap, and the doors had just been firmly locked. I did not break my calm, composed demeanor. I slowly reached into the pocket of my emerald gown. I withdrew a pristine dark silk handkerchief. I looked down at the cheap champagne soaking into the fine silk fabric of my hemline. I bent slightly, maintaining my elegant posture, and gently dabbed the spilled alcohol, absorbing the moisture with deliberate precision. I straightened up, holding the damp silk cloth between my fingers. I tossed it casually forward. The handkerchief fluttered through the tense, quiet air and landed softly directly at Vanessa's trembling feet. I held Jamal's terrified gaze, letting the absolute gravity of his situation crush him. "You were expecting the CEO of Aegis Global, Jamal?" I asked, my voice echoing perfectly through the dead-silent ballroom. "I am here, and your audit is complete." I did not wait for Jamal to process the reality of his total destruction. I simply turned my back on his gaping expression and began walking directly toward the grand stage erected at the far end of the ballroom. Wealthy investors and corrupt politicians practically trampled each other trying to get out of my path. The crowd parted, eyes darting nervously between my emerald gown and the heavily armed Aegis operatives marching in perfect unison around me. Marcus signaled two of the operatives with a sharp tilt of his head. They instantly broke away from my defensive perimeter and moved with alarming speed toward the audio-visual control booth overlooking the dance floor. The hotel technician inside took one look at their tactical gear and wisely abandoned his post, scrambling out the side door. I climbed the velvet-lined steps to the main stage with measured precision. The spotlight caught the diamonds at my throat, illuminating me for the entire room to see. Jamal had designed this stage to elevate himself above his peers, projecting an image of untouchable financial supremacy. Now I was standing on his meticulously crafted pedestal, preparing to shatter his illusion into a million unrecoverable pieces. I reached the center of the stage and pulled a sleek black smartphone from a hidden pocket in the folds of my gown. I did not ask for permission. I did not address the crowd with pleasantries. I tapped the screen exactly once. The secure connection Marcus had established with the ballroom's mainframe engaged instantly. The massive LED screens spanning the stage's back wall suddenly flickered. Jamal had paid a fortune to display a looped promotional video featuring fake architectural renderings and fabricated graphs showcasing infinite upward growth. Those lies vanished in a burst of static. the screens illuminated with a blinding white light before snapping into sharp, undeniable focus. My Aegis forensic accounting team had spent the last 6 months tearing through Jamal's digital infrastructure. Now their findings were broadcast in towering high definition for every single one of his elite investors to see. The first slide displayed the Cayman Islands offshore accounts. It showed the exact routing numbers Jamal used to siphon investor capital out of domestic accounts and funnel it into untraceable offshore havens. The crowd erupted into frantic, furious whispers. Men in $1,000 suits began pulling out their phones, their faces contorted in panic. I swiped my screen again. The display shifted to reveal the tangled web of shell companies Vanessa had proudly bragged about earlier. The screens showed irrefutable proof that her upcoming luxury commercial spa was a hollow corporate entity designed solely to launder money stolen from retired municipal workers. Every fake invoice, every forged signature, every illegal wire transfer was laid bare. I highlighted the exact dates Jamal had bribed state inspectors to approve non-existent construction milestones. I displayed the encrypted emails between him and corrupt local officials. The sheer scale of his embezzlement was breathtaking, and the digital paper trail was absolutely airtight. Aegis Global did not just find the missing money. We mapped out the entire anatomy of a massive federal crime syndicate operating under the guise of an elite investment firm. The reality of his absolute exposure finally snapped Jamal out of his paralyzed stupor. The illusion of his invincibility was currently flashing on 50-foot screens for the entire world to witness. He saw his prestigious investors turning away from him in utter disgust. He saw Commander Briggs backing away, pulling out a secure satellite phone to immediately freeze his asset transfers. Jamal lost his mind. He let out a guttural, animalistic scream that tore through the chaos of the ballroom. He charged blindly toward the stage, his arms swinging wildly as he sprinted up the aisle. He completely ignored the elite security operatives standing between him and me. It was a spectacular display of reckless arrogance. He reached the bottom of the velvet steps, preparing to lunge upward. He did not make it past the first step. Two Aegis contractors moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. One operative swept Jamal's legs out from under him with a brutal bone-jarring kick. As Jamal fell forward, the second operative grabbed him by the shoulder of his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket and slammed him face first into the hard marble floor. The impact echoed loudly, followed immediately by the sickening sound of fabric tearing as they pinned his arms violently behind his back. Jamal thrashed like a netted shark, his face pressed painfully against the cold stone, spitting curses and screaming that the documents were forged. The operatives did not even break a sweat. They held him down effortlessly, their knees pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, rendering him completely immobilized. Watching her husband get tackled and pinned to the floor by heavily armed men finally broke Vanessa's fragile grip on reality. Her $15,000 sequined gown offered no protection against the catastrophic collapse of her entire world. She dropped to her knees, her hands covering her face as she let out a piercing, hysterical wail. Aunt Diane completely lost her mind. She stood over her ruined son-in-law, her face pale with terror and outrage. She pointed a shaking finger at the Aegis operatives holding Jamal down. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, demanding that anyone do something to stop this madness. "Call the police!" Aunt Diane screamed, her voice breaking into a frantic, desperate sob as she looked around at the crowd of investors who were hastily edging toward the exits. "Call the police right now. They are assaulting him. They are ruining our family." I stepped forward, moving to the edge of the stage. I leaned down, grasping the silver microphone resting on the podium. I looked directly at the panicked, shrieking woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was worthless. "Oh, do not worry, Diane," I said, my voice projecting with lethal calm over the speakers. "The authorities are already here." My words hung in the chilled air of the ballroom. Aunt Diane froze, her mouth still open in shock. She looked toward the heavy oak doors, expecting police cruisers and flashing blue lights. But I was not finished dismantling their legacy. I needed to ensure no one in this room would ever fund his fraudulent ventures again. I swiped my smartphone screen one final time. The massive LED displays behind me shifted from the web of offshore bank accounts to a simple pulsing audio waveform. The ballroom sound system crackled to life. My operatives pulled every deleted file, encrypted voicemail, and secure internal server recording from his private office network. I wanted the Wall Street elites to hear what Jamal thought of them and how he planned to save his drowning company. A sharp click echoed through the speakers, followed by the arrogant voice of Jamal himself. The recording was crystal clear, capturing a private meeting he held with his core executives 2 weeks prior. "I am bankrupt," the recorded voice of Jamal boomed, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and sinking into the bones of every investor present. "We are bleeding cash, and the SEC is breathing down my neck. But I have a solution. We will just steal the woodland cabin belonging to my cousin. We will forge her signature, bulldoze her moldy shack by Monday, and build the commercial luxury retreat over her property line. That will artificially inflate our asset column enough to secure funding." A second voice on the recording asked about the legal risks. The recorded laughter of Jamal filled the ballroom, a harsh, dismissive sound that made my blood run cold. "Who cares about the legal risks?" the recorded Jamal sneered. "She is too stupid and poor to fight back. She works a pathetic IT job. We will crush her before she even realizes the deed is gone. By the time she finds a lawyer, we will be millions of dollars richer." The audio file ended, leaving only the soft pulsing of the visual waveform on the screens behind me. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the suffocating weight of total social execution. The elite investors, the aggressive hedge fund managers, and the influential politicians Jamal had courted so desperately stood paralyzed. They had just heard their supposed financial prodigy casually admit to total bankruptcy and premeditated real estate theft. Commander Briggs turned his back first. The billionaire veteran did not say a word. He simply pivoted on his heel, motioned for his private security detail, and began walking toward the exit, completely ignoring the pathetic, muffled protests coming from the floor. It was the signal the rest of the room needed. The wealthy, exclusive circle that Aunt Diane and Uncle Thomas had spent decades painstakingly cultivating dissolved in a matter of seconds. High society socialites who had just been drinking champagne with Vanessa now physically turned their backs, pulling their designer coats tight around their shoulders. They whispered furiously to one another, their faces contorted in absolute disgust. No one wanted to be caught standing anywhere near a federal crime scene. They treated the entire family like an infectious disease. Uncle Thomas, who had been hiding near the bar all evening, finally stepped forward, his face red with shame. He grabbed Aunt Diane by the arm, trying to pull her away from the disaster, but she resisted. She was shaking violently, looking at her elite friends as they actively avoided her gaze. The women she played tennis with, the men who attended their exclusive country club dinners. They all walked past her without a single word of comfort. Decades of social climbing, of kissing up to the right people and stepping on anyone below them, had vanished in the span of 3 minutes. Before the last of the investors could flee into the lobby, the main ballroom doors swung open with brutal force. They did not open for fleeing socialites. A dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the SEC emblazoned across their backs strode into the room. They moved with absolute, terrifying authority. The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with a severe expression, held up a thick stack of warrants. "Jamal Kensington," the lead agent announced, her voice easily cutting through the remaining crowd. "You are under arrest for massive wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Secure the premises. Nobody from the executive board leaves this room until we have seized their devices." 2 federal agents marched directly toward the stage. My Aegis operatives, recognizing legitimate federal authority, smoothly stepped back, lifting their knees from the spine of Jamal. The FBI agents grabbed Jamal roughly by the shoulders, hauling him up from the marble floor. They slammed his wrists together, the cold steel of federal handcuffs snapping shut with a sharp, undeniable click. The sound echoed like a death knell for the Kensington Empire. Vanessa collapsed, entirely curling into a sobbing, hysterical ball on the floor, her ruined sequined dress pooling around her. She screamed for her mother, but Aunt Diane was already being questioned by a stern SEC investigator near the champagne fountain. Jamal stumbled, his expensive tuxedo ripped at the shoulder, his face bruised from hitting the floor. The federal agents held him tightly by the arms, preparing to march him out of the Waldorf Astoria and into a waiting tactical vehicle. He stopped struggling. His wild, panicked eyes darted through the crowd of federal agents and Aegis operatives until they finally locked onto mine. The overwhelming arrogance, the toxic superiority, and the vicious pride were completely gone. He was nothing but a broken, terrified shell of a man, facing decades in federal prison. He looked up at me from the cold bottom of the stage, tears of pure terror streaming quickly down his face. "Please, Riley," Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whimper as the agents pulled him forward. "We are family." "We are not family," I replied, my voice stripped of all emotion, echoing coldly in the cavernous ballroom. "We happen to share a bloodline, Jamal. Family does not forge signatures to steal the last remaining asset of someone they consider beneath them. Family does not brag about ruining lives over vintage champagne." The lead FBI agent did not allow Jamal another second to plead his miserable case. She gave a sharp nod to her subordinates. The two towering federal agents hauled Jamal up roughly by the collar of his ruined custom tuxedo. He stumbled forward, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping on the champagne-soaked marble floor. He looked entirely pathetic, a hollow fraud finally stripped of his expensive camouflage. The agents dragged him down the center aisle of the Waldorf Astoria ballroom. The remaining elite guests shrank back against the walls, desperately avoiding eye contact as the disgraced financier was forcibly marched out the grand gilded doors and into the cold reality of a waiting federal transport vehicle. I turned my attention to Vanessa. She was still crumpled on the floor, her $15,000 sequined gown stained and ruined. She was hyperventilating, her hands clutching her perfectly styled hair. A female SEC investigator broke away from the main cluster of federal agents and walked purposefully toward her. The investigator did not offer a hand to help Vanessa up. Instead, she produced a heavy, clear plastic evidence bag. Vanessa Kensington, the investigator, stated, her tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "We have a federal warrant to seize all assets purchased with misappropriated investor capital. That includes the diamond collar necklace you are currently wearing and the limited edition Birkin handbag dropped by the fountain. Remove the jewelry immediately." Vanessa gasped, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She clutched the heavy diamonds at her throat as if they were a lifeline. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "This is mine. My husband bought this for me for our anniversary. You are making a terrible mistake." "There is no mistake," the investigator replied firmly, signaling for two uniformed officers to step closer. "The funds used to purchase those diamonds were traced directly back to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Remove the necklace, or we will remove it for you." The sheer public humiliation of the moment was absolute. The wealthy socialites who had fawned over Vanessa just an hour ago now watched in morbid fascination as she was systematically stripped of her ill-gotten status symbols. Trembling violently, crying heavy tears that ruined her immaculate makeup, Vanessa reached behind her neck. Her fingers fumbled uselessly with the intricate platinum clasp. One of the federal officers impatiently stepped forward, unfastening the necklace and dropping the glittering diamonds unceremoniously into the plastic evidence bag. Another agent scooped up her exclusive designer handbag from the floor, bagging it right in front of her face. Stripped of her stolen armor, Vanessa completely unraveled. The reality of her sudden catastrophic poverty broke her mind. She slammed her fists against the cold marble floor, letting out a raw, hysterical scream. She scrambled awkwardly to her feet, her ruined dress clinging to her legs, and lunged wildly in my direction. My Aegis operatives instantly closed ranks, forming an impenetrable wall of tactical armor between us, but I raised my hand silently, ordering them to stand down. Vanessa dropped back to her knees, weeping hysterically, her face contorted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. "You ruined my life!" she screamed at me, her voice hoarse and raw. "You planned this. You orchestrated this entire thing just to destroy us because you have always been jealous of me." You are a monster. I stepped forward, moving past my security detail. I closed the distance between us and slowly crouched down until I was exactly at Vanessa's eye level. She flinched, leaning away from me, but I held her gaze with unwavering, chilling intensity. I did not plan your greed, Vanessa, I said quietly, ensuring every single syllable sliced clearly through her hysterical sobbing. I did not force your husband to embezzle millions of dollars, and I certainly did not force you to flaunt stolen wealth in my face. I just stopped being your victim. I stood up smoothly, adjusting the hem of my emerald gown. Aunt Diane and Uncle Thomas, who had spent the last 20 minutes cowering near the catering tables, finally realized the catastrophic extent of their social ruin. They saw the wealthy elite actively avoiding them. They saw their daughter stripped and crying on the floor. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to salvage any remaining shred of power or dignity, they scurried across the ballroom floor toward me. They deliberately stepped around their weeping daughter, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of Jamal's federal indictment. Riley, sweetheart. Aunt Diane began, her voice trembling with an incredibly fake, desperate warmth. We had absolutely no idea Jamal was doing any of this. You must believe us. We are just as shocked as you are. Uncle Thomas nodded vigorously, offering a weak, trembling smile. You have achieved such incredible success, Riley. We are so immensely proud of you. Becoming the commander of Aegis Global is an astonishing feat. We always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. We should sit down as a family and discuss how we can support your new ventures. I looked at my aunt and uncle. Then I looked past them to where my own parents had quietly stepped out from the shadows of the exit doors, their faces displaying the exact same hungry, calculating desperation as Diane and Thomas. They had all treated me like worthless dirt until they saw the power I truly wielded. I looked at my parents with absolute zero emotion. The silence in the grand ballroom deepened. You did not want me when I was struggling. You do not get me now that I am a billionaire. I turned around and walked right out. The towering glass facade of the Aegis Global headquarters reflected the gray afternoon sky like a fortress of modern wealth. Aunt Diane parked the battered sedan near the loading dock, too ashamed to surrender the rusting vehicle to the pristine valet stand out front. They walked toward the main doors in total silence, the crushing weight of their new reality making every step agonizing. Vanessa trailed behind her parents, wearing the same faded sweatpants from her eviction. The sheer intimidation of the massive skyscraper made her shrink even further into herself. She was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant socialite who had sneered at me just 2 weeks prior. Inside the lobby, the floors were cut from seamless Italian marble, and the walls were lined with brushed steel and cascading water features. Armed Aegis security personnel monitored the space with terrifying precision. Aunt Diane approached the monolithic reception desk, her usual haughty demeanor entirely erased. She meekly gave her name to the receptionist, expecting rejection. Instead, the receptionist tapped a touchscreen and nodded with cold efficiency. Commander Hades is expecting you, the receptionist stated, gesturing toward a private glass elevator secured by a retinal scanner. The ascent to the penthouse boardroom was suffocating. The elevator shot upward, offering a sweeping, vertigo-inducing view of the city skyline that Jamal used to claim he owned. Now, that city belonged to me. The elevator doors chimed and slid open, revealing an expansive boardroom that occupied the entire top floor. A massive table carved from a single slab of black obsidian dominated the center of the room. Tall windows offered a panoramic view of the financial district. I sat at the head of the obsidian table, perfectly still, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. Marcus stood exactly 3 feet behind my right shoulder, his arms crossed over his tactical vest, his expression unreadable. I did not stand to greet them. I did not offer them water or ask them to sit. I let the oppressive silence of the penthouse crush them as they awkwardly shuffled into the room. Vanessa broke first. The moment she saw me sitting at the apex of all this unimaginable power, her knees simply gave out. She collapsed into one of the expensive leather chairs, buried her face in her hands, and began weeping uncontrollably. It was not a calculated, manipulative cry designed to garner sympathy. It was the raw, ugly sobbing of a woman whose massive ego had been completely pulverized by reality. Her arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow terror. Aunt Diane gripped the back of Vanessa's chair, her knuckles turning white. She looked around the opulent boardroom, taking in the undeniable proof of the empire I had built, while she had been busy calling me a financial failure. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing as she forced herself to meet my gaze. Riley Aunt Diane began, her voice cracking under the immense strain of her destroyed pride. "We have nowhere else to go. The lawyers will not even answer our calls anymore without retainers. They are talking about federal conspiracy charges. They are talking about putting Thomas and me in prison over our accounts. We had absolutely no idea what he was doing." I remained silent, letting her words hang in the sterile air. My lack of reaction made her panic escalate. "We are blood, Riley." Diane begged, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her cheap makeup. "We are family. You have all this. You have an empire. Please, we just need $1 million to secure a defense attorney. Just $1 million. It is nothing to you. It is pocket change for a company like Aegis Global. You cannot let your own family rot in a federal penitentiary. We will do anything you want." Uncle Thomas nodded frantically beside her, his hands clasped together in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "We will pay you back, Riley," he promised, his voice shaking. "We will work the rest of our lives to repay the loan. Just help us survive this." I looked at the three of them. I analyzed their desperate, weeping faces. I saw no genuine remorse for how they had treated me my entire life. I saw no apology for the decades of psychological abuse, the relentless mockery, or the cruel exclusion. They were only sorry that the person they had relentlessly bullied turned out to be the only billionaire capable of saving them from a concrete cell. I slowly reached across the smooth obsidian table. I picked up a pristine manila folder bearing the gold Aegis Global seal. I slid it deliberately across the black surface. The folder stopped precisely in front of Vanessa. Aunt Diane let out a sharp gasp of pure relief. She genuinely believed I had just handed them their salvation. She thought her emotional manipulation had worked one final time. Uncle Thomas placed a shaking hand over his heart, muttering quiet words of immense gratitude. Vanessa wiped her red, swollen eyes with the back of her sleeve. She reached out with trembling fingers and opened the folder. She expected to see a certified bank check for $1 million. She expected a legal contract offering the full protection of my corporate attorneys. Instead, she stared down at a single heavily itemized invoice. Vanessa frowned, her tear-stained face twisting in profound confusion as her eyes scanned the bold numbers printed at the bottom of the page. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. I leaned back in my leather executive chair and smiled. "That is the $12,000 catering bill from your backyard barbecue," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls. "Plus a 50% interest fee for the severe emotional distress you caused me when you purposefully ruined my dress. Pay it by Friday or my lawyers will permanently garnish your new supermarket wages." Vanessa stared at the itemized invoice in complete horror. The color drained from her face as her brain struggled to process the astronomical numbers printed at the bottom of the page. Aunt Diane lunged forward to rip the paper from her daughter's trembling hands. She read the bold text and let out a strangled gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the edge of the conference table. Uncle Thomas simply hung his head, realizing their final desperate gambit had spectacularly failed. They had come begging for millions to save their miserable lives, and I had handed them a retail debt that would keep them impoverished for the next decade. Aunt Diane looked up at me with wild, panicked eyes. "You cannot do this to us!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the boardroom. "We have nothing left. The government took our house. They froze our retirement accounts. We are bagging groceries just to buy food. We cannot pay this. You must reconsider and help your own family." "That sounds like a personal financial crisis," I replied calmly, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. "And I am strictly forbidden from offering financial advice to individuals under active federal investigation." Vanessa dropped the invoice on the obsidian table as if it were burning her skin. She dropped to her knees again, grabbing the edge of my chair. "Please," she begged, tears leaving dark mascara streaks down her cheeks. "Please, Riley. We are so sorry. We will do anything. Just give us a loan. We will scrub the floors of this building. We will be your assistants. Just do not let us starve." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I felt no pity. I felt no triumph. I simply felt an overwhelming, profound sense of finality. The toxic cycle that had suffocated me for decades was finally over. I raised my right hand and caught the eye of Commander Briggs, who was standing stoically by the elevator bank. "Escort them out." I instructed, my voice flat and absolute. "Permanently." Briggs did not hesitate. He signaled the two Aegis security operatives stationed outside the glass doors. They entered the boardroom with silent, terrifying efficiency. They grabbed Uncle Thomas by the arms and hauled him toward the exit. Aunt Diane began screaming hysterically, thrashing her arms, as an operative firmly grasped her shoulders and marched her backward. Vanessa refused to stand up. Two guards simply grabbed her by the elbows and dragged her across the polished Italian marble floor. Her sneakers squeaked loudly against the stone as she sobbed, begging for a second chance that she was never going to get. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid shut. The retinal scanner locked with a sharp, definitive click. The hysterical screaming of my former family was instantly muffled, then completely silenced as the elevator plummeted back down to the street level. I sat alone in the massive penthouse, listening to the absolute quiet of my empire. The air in the high altitudes of the Pacific Northwest carried a sharp, biting chill that smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my armored Aegis SUV, navigating the steep, winding mountain road with practiced ease. The heavy military-grade tires crushed loose gravel and snapped fallen branches as the massive vehicle climbed higher into the dense emerald forest. The tension that had resided in my shoulders for the past 6 months slowly evaporated with every mile I put between myself and the city. There were no cell phone towers up here. There were no screaming socialites, no corrupt federal investigators, and absolutely no toxic family members looking for a handout. There was only the steady hum of the massive engine and the towering ancient trees standing like silent sentinels along the misty ridge. I navigated the final sharp curve of the mountain path. The dense tree line suddenly broke apart, revealing a stunning sunlit clearing overlooking a vast sweeping valley. I eased the SUV to a stop and cut the engine. I stepped out into the crisp mountain air. There, nestled perfectly against the edge of the cliff, was my grandfather's cabin. It stood exactly as he had left it. The sturdy oak logs were weathered but strong. The wraparound wooden porch was entirely untouched. There were no bulldozers waiting to tear it down. There were no neon surveyor stakes marking the boundaries of Jamal's fake luxury retreat. The land belonged entirely to me, secured by airtight ironclad trusts and protected by the most elite private security force on the planet. Jamal would spend the rest of his life rotting in a federal penitentiary for trying to steal it. Vanessa and her parents would spend their remaining years working double shifts to pay off the catering bill they owed me. They were completely erased from my reality. I walked up the wooden steps, the worn timber groaning familiarly beneath my boots. I unlocked the heavy front door and stepped inside. The cabin smelled of old wood dust and deeply ingrained memories. I walked straight into the small rustic kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. 10 minutes later, I walked back outside and sat down on the wooden porch chair, overlooking the endless green valley below. I held the warm ceramic mug in both hands, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the dark black coffee. The steam curled upward, catching the golden afternoon sunlight. I listened to the cool mountain wind rustling gently through the canopy of the ancient pines. I did not just survive the cruel, greedy people who actively tried to destroy me. I conquered every single one of them entirely. I completely broke their vicious cycle of abuse, dismantled their fraudulent empire, and finally claimed my rightful place at the very top of the world. The screen fades to black on a shot of the true, untouchable independence I built for myself.